So, on your notes, you should be right here on encomienda. This is where you should be at for your notes. Okay, so with the encomienda, we talked about this a little bit before, right? So you have Spanish settlers coming over into America and coming over to be able to get land. How they're going to get land is through this system. Basically, you were given free land if you were willing to have slaves and work the land, which pretty much everybody at this point is going to do. And so in this case, what's going to happen is these people are going to get this land and get slaves, and it's going to work out well for them.
Not for the slaves, though.
Not for the slaves. And you probably learned about that in your homework, right? Do you love him?
Yeah, I gave you a highlighter.
Oh, that's great. It's very nice. So the problem, though, with the encomienda system is the encomienda system was pretty awful for the Native Americans. If you think about the encomienda system in comparison to the African slavery, it was very, very similar. So, for example, you can see in this picture right here that they are looking and trying to figure out, are these people able-bodied? Are they able to be successful on their plantations? It was very much like African slavery. This, by the way, is in the West Indies, which is Indies. If you ever hear that term West Indies, the West Indies are going to be where all these slavery and plantations are. The average lifespan of an Indian slave was only 1 month. They would die because of smallpox, possibly being overworked. Then they would be immediately replaced with their new slave that they needed. And so it really wasn't a big deal because they were just traded in commodities. It wasn't, I have to buy a really expensive slave. You found a new one, subjugated them, and moved on. Now, this guy right here, De la Casas, you should know this person, right? Okay, now we had one class that messed up this question, so let's make sure you're listening to the question. De la Casas, would he be pro or against Native American slavery?
Yes.
Thank you, because last class said pro and I was really worried. So, definitely anti-slavery, right? You guys all did an assignment on this. So, De la Casas, who he is and what I would know is he was Catholic, okay? He is going to spread that Catholic faith. And how he's going to do this is he is going to say, Christ would not enslave these people. Christ would convert them to Catholicism, right? So instead of enslaving them, we should convert them all to be Catholics. So that was kind of the goal here. Make everybody Catholic through this priesthood. Now, the other thing as well, and I just realized, Pablo, can I have that first paper back? I just remembered I forgot to bring it. 1 second. I forgot that I need to write things. Okay. So, things that I would know on this, I would know the Spanish priest. Because again, like we were talking about before, he's going to spread Catholicism. I would know where it says, criticized how the conquistadors were treating the natives. That's really important because that's what he did. He wrote several books about it. And then I would circle where it says the new laws. Basically, this is the result or the consequence of Bartolomé de las Casas. Now, what these new laws did, and what I would underline again, is it abolished encomiendas and no more taking Indians as slaves. This completely changes the economy of the West Indies as well as Central America. Pretty much this ends slavery for Spain, even with African slavery. They're not really going to do it because too many people are upset because of what they've seen previously through Bartolomé de las Casas' books. Now, in terms of what these people saw in these books, so de las Casas is always going to be portrayed as positive with the natives. They're not going to see a picture with him in it where the natives were upset. But instead, he's going to write this book, The Short Account of the Destruction of the Indies. That's that West Indies, the Caribbean, where they had plantations. It does say a short account, but it's actually 800 pages long. So I would not invest in this short account unless you have a time to read 800 pages from a Spanish guy. Yes?
Is that relatively short?
I mean, there were shorter books. I would say the average book back this time is about 800 to 1,500 pages. I mean, if you look at some of Columbus's writing, they were 10,000-page books. Mostly because that's what they did when they retired. That's how they made money, is they wrote books about their life. And, I mean, some of Columbus's books are real boring. It talks about how one day he ate oranges and the next day he ate meat. I mean, they wrote about anything and everything. Their diaries would be published, and that's how they made money after they retired. If they weren't already killed by, people all around the world. Because that's usually what happened. Marco Polo died the same way. He thought he was going to make a bunch of money, and he died very savagely. They chopped off all his body parts and then burned him in a fire.
Wasn't there like a guy who went around the world and died like that for building?
Marco Polo. And Magellan. Magellan, excuse me, is who I'm talking about. Yeah. Magellan did that same exact thing. Yeah. People died pretty gruesomely when the natives got tired of being abused. So anyway, what are the kind of things that they described? So some of the things that he described, this is a picture that he drew based on what he had seen in the West Indies. So what can you see here? Well, you can see that these people are starved. You can tell because you can see the bones throughout their bodies. Unfortunately, the slave master, it's not their first priority to feed their slaves. But you have to make them work, right? So what are you going to do? You're going to take all the sick people and the people that you don't like. You're going to kill them, which you can see right here. You can also see a baby. Babies can't work on a plantation. They're useless. So you kill them, chop them up, and now that's your food source for your slaves. A lot of times at the very beginning, they didn't know they were eating slaves. They thought that they were eating meat, like beef. Just really chewy beef. Later on is when they really discovered that they were eating each other, but at a certain point, it's either you eat or you die. And most of the time, they're going to choose to eat. Now, other things that would happen. So in this picture, we can see that the slave ship is coming because we can see that it's arrived right here. So more than likely, this is a subjugation where they're first coming in contact with the Indians and saying, you are now our slaves. And if you disagreed, which usually always happened, they would make a showing of you. So what we can see in here is we have women as well as men who have been captured and hung. They are then being burned. And this is really it's to show everybody else that you should be fearful of the Spanish. And then, as you can see right here, you have a child, a baby, being thrown up against a stone wall. So, it was a life of fear. They didn't care if you were scared. That wasn't the point. But these kind of images, people start to say, De la Casa's right. Why are we subjugating these Spaniards? And so if you put that he was the more impactful writing, you were correct. Because these were the guys that really started to make an impact. So if you actually look at how De la Casas is portrayed in Mexican society, you're actually going to notice that he was considered the savior of the natives. A lot of Mayan culture is very pro De la Casas. Several cities are named after him as well as schools because he was the savior of the Native Americans. So Spanish successes in North America, the real word that I would put underneath this is going to be Catholic. That's really the big success here, is that Catholicism is going to spread throughout the Americas. Now, you can see this all throughout Mexico as well as in the southern United States until very recently. Who's seen the movie Coco? Yeah. Next time you watch it, you should look for all the crosses that are in it. There's crosses in the entire thing. They said something like there's 3,000 crosses in that movie. It's because what's the major religion of Mexico? Catholicism. And why is that? The Spaniards brought it, right? There's a reason why if you've ever seen like the really big statue in Rio de Janeiro of Christ, that's a Catholic statue. So all of that comes from the Catholicism and the impact of the Spaniards as well as the Portuguese is coming into America.
Were the Portuguese there for Catholicism?
Well, the Portuguese, pretty much they went to Brazil. Their goal was to find a trade route to China. They landed in Brazil thinking that they could make it through the Amazon and make it over to the other side. When they realized pretty quickly that wasn't going to happen, they actually pulled out. There's a reason why only Brazil is really popular with colonization. It's simply because they stopped in Brazil. Their goal wasn't to defeat the Americas, they wanted to get to China. So that's why like Magellan and things like that are going to keep going around the world, and Marco Polo, because they're going to keep going because they want to get to China. Portugal really didn't feel like Brazil or South America had any use whatsoever. Does that make sense? Okay. Impact of European arms and diseases. I would star this section. This is a really important effect of what was going on. We've already talked about this before. We talked about smallpox. The word, though, that you don't know that you're going to need to highlight or know is going to be the word mestizo. Mestizo. Now, mestizo is a really important term that really shows the impact of Spanish colonialism on America. So what is a mestizo? Well, what happens is you have a bunch of guys come over as explorers and conquistadors. Only men. Women, this was way too disastrous or dangerous as an environment. Remember, women at this time are treated as fragile women and who are delicate, who can't go and explore the world. So only men go over, but men get bored when they go over, right? They want to have a good time. There's no white woman around, so they're going to go find a Native American woman who they've already subjugated, and they're going to go hang out and they're going to make some babies. Okay? Now, these mestizo children are these mixed race children. That's a combination between the Spaniards and the native populations. Now, when you've had these babies, it really depended on their skin color of whether they were going to be okay or not in the world. The reason why, so you can see it right here in this picture, this is a darker skinned child, more Native American, while this one is a lighter skinned child. So typically, this child, the whiter child, will go back with the man. He'll say, oh, I found a nice woman in South America. We had a child. She unfortunately died of smallpox, birth, whatever it could possibly be that they're going to say. He's going to bring them back as if this baby was born by a white child. He will never admit that it was to a Native American ever. She, on the other hand, will still live in South America with her child and will receive no support from him whatsoever. It's one of those, I met you, we had a kid, I'm out of your life. That's basically what happened here, except on a really big scale. We see the same thing happen with African American slavery. A lot of this is simply rape culture of dominance. It was very common in the 1800s as well with slaves. It was just this idea of I control you and I get what I need. It's really unfortunate, but it happened all the time. If you want to know the impact of the mestizo population, they say right now, in terms of native populations of Central and South American Indians, they say 90% of them are mestizo descendants, which is interesting because if you're mestizo, you're seen as less of a person. There's a really big racial divide and segregation. So that 90% is actually seen as less in social class than a pure Native American in South America and Central America. Yeah?
What are the percentages for the rest of the 10%?
The rest of the 10% are considered what they consider pure. So if I remember correctly, the statistic is if you are less, or if you are more than 1/32nd mestizo, you're considered a mestizo. So in theory, the rest of the population may have had more than likely somebody who was white come into their population, maybe a great-great-great-grandfather, but that was it. There were no more Spaniards mixing in. But if you have a bunch of white in your heritage, then you would be considered a mestizo. I know if you do like the DNA, like the Ancestry.com, they say if you have at least 15% European in you, you are considered a mestizo. And so you're seen as less of a person. Which I find very interesting because it's actually the minority is pure.
Well, what I was asking is, what are the rest of the percentages? Like, how many are pure native and how many are like?
It's about 10. I mean, we're going off of what they consider native populations. So 10% is considered pure native. But if I remember, I'm going off of the reason I say this is because in the World Cup, which was in Brazil, this came up as a big deal because the mestizo population were the ones building the stadiums because they're seen as the lower class so they can pay them less. And so the mestizos were the one building the World Cup stadiums. And if you heard about the World Cup stadiums collapsing and killing people, most of those people were mestizos. And it's very similar to, for instance, in India, if you are darker skinned, which in theory would mean that you're more pure Indian, you're seen as less than somebody who has lighter skin. The whole idea of skin color is absolutely fascinating. Same thing happens in India too, because those populations who are darker skinned tend to have less income and then also tend to have the worst jobs in India. And they're trying to break that stereotype right now, but it's really hard to break stereotypes that have been around for thousands of years. Yeah?
Did the Europeans have genetic immunity to smallpox or just acquired?
The Europeans?
Yes.
It's acquired through genetics. So it's the same reason as right now, most of you are immune, at least some part, to smallpox, to measles, to polio, because somebody in your family has had it previously. People who previously had it creates the immunity. That's why the best example is the plague. If you have European descent, you are more than likely immune, at least almost fully immune, to the Black Plague. Which is why when a Black Plague case comes up in America, it's such a big deal, because you've had so many ancestors have it that you gain genetic immunity.
So does that explain why the mestizo children were more likely to survive?
Yes, actually, that's a great example. And that's going super deep, but yes, the mestizo population partially did survive because they do have this guy right here who already has immunity to smallpox. You breed a child who has immunity, and then as you get more and more white children and more mixing, you begin to get more genetic immunity. Great question. Fantastic question, actually. Any more questions on this? You guys are asking so many questions today. I love it. Some of my other classes don't ask me anything. They just stare. Okay. Columbian Exchange, this one's a double star. Very, very important term. Hopefully you took AP Human Geography or you took AP World, AP Euro, and you know what the Columbian Exchange is. So the Columbian Exchange is the exchange of goods, ideas, plants, animals, everything you can think of across the Atlantic Ocean through these trade routes. Now, this is the most famous example that you'll see. This, by the way, has been put on the AP exam in the past. I believe it might even be on your test as this picture. But basically, it's the exchanging of goods and ideas. Now, positives, exchanging of food. This is a really big thing. If you see, coffee beans are going to come from the Middle East. If you don't know, today, the highest exporters of coffee beans is Central America and South America. So we can already see the impact there. From the Americas, you have potatoes. That becomes a staple in Europe. If you've heard of the Irish potato famine, that's where that comes from. So a lot of these become staple foods in these other cultures when this cultural exchange is occurring. Great example, by the way, if you think of Thanksgiving dinner, those are all old world foods. So that's all, or new world foods, which are all of these. Those are all things that are going to go over into Europe. Now, negatives, the biggest is disease. You're bringing disease, you're bringing poisonous plants over, which really affects the environment in the Americas. So the last thing that we're going to cover, and this is going to lead into your in-class assignment, is what do we do about Columbus Day? Okay? So Columbus Day has been celebrated, it's a federal holiday, for hundreds of years. It's supposed to celebrate the exploration and the discovery of the Americas, as well as the beginning of, in theory, America with exploration in 1492. However, in the last 10 years, there's been a big shift. Should we actually celebrate Columbus Day or not? A lot of people say that this is actually, you're basically celebrating the destruction of the Native Americans. They say that this is kind of more pushing. It's really anti-Native American is the big push right now. And so there's been a lot of question about whether or not this should be Columbus Day, or a lot of people are pushing it to change to what's called Indigenous Peoples Day or Native Peoples Day. That's Washington and Oregon were the first states to actually create that as a state holiday where they celebrate native tribes instead of celebrating Christopher Columbus. So, do you have a question?
I thought people did Leif Erikson.
Leif Erikson Day? Some people might do Leif Erikson Day. I think if they did Leif Erikson Day, I could also see that as saying the same exact thing, of saying Leif Erikson discovered the Americas rather than Columbus. I don't know of any states in particular that have made that officially the holiday. Some people might celebrate that, but I know on the statewide level, they've done the Indigenous Peoples Day or Native Peoples Day. Here in Utah, last year, we'll see if it happens this year, there was a huge rally at the state capitol to celebrate Native Americans rather than Columbus. But if they did Leif Erikson, I think that would be really interesting. But I can also see them saying the same exact statement as Columbus Day. Personally, from my thoughts. Because they would say he discovered the Americas. But his stuff was up in Canada compared to the United States.
But Columbus was in the Caribbean, not the United States.
I know. But I guess what I could say though is to that is because of the things that came out of that Caribbean, they say that Columbus is more related than Leif Erikson. Most people in America don't even know who Leif Erikson is. They maybe learned about him in 2nd grade. Yeah. So this is what I want you to do, is on your in-class assignment, there are 3 questions. Okay? The last one is going to ask you, do you feel like Columbus Day should be celebrated or not? Now, a lot of students in 3A already started to have points taken off of their assignment because they're not explaining their answers. So, for example, I had several people put, yes, Columbus Day should be celebrated, or no, it should not be celebrated. And that was it. Okay? Expand on your answers and really tell me what you think. So, you're going to have a few minutes to complete these questions. Once you're done, you turn them into the basket, and then you come back and get ready for the rest of today's class. Okay? All right, go ahead. What? Rex?
Is that Rex Tippett's on your cabinet?
Oh, no, that's Matthew Brothers.
Oh.
So this was the homework from last class. This was the notes. You should have asked me for this earlier because this is what we were on. But these are the notes for last class. And they're doing this part right now. So you can do this part, but then you'll also have to complete this part. And it's based on the Iroquois Constitution on the back. Yeah, you can work on something else. It's fine. Okay. Yeah, as long as you for sure just working on this assignment. Okay, that's fine. If you're working on an assignment, you can use your phone if you want.
No, it's just my dad's getting ready for a trip, and he's asking me something.
Okay, then that's fine. Just let me know if it's something like that.
Sure.
Take about 2 more minutes. Did you need a new copy of the disclosure?
No, I already turned it in. I just picked it up and mixed it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was like, you're not in your class.
Yeah.
And if you know that, be later.
Yeah.
Okay. So go ahead and grab out the new notes for today. Starting on our next section. The one that's the stapled packet is what you should be on now. If you're still working on that previous assignment, that's all right. Just grab out that packet. We're getting started on our new stuff. It could be an ice cream cone. Could be different. You never know what the connect the dots could be.
I'm pretty sure that.
Okay, so for the first two underlines, the French colonization and the Spanish colonization, those are chapter 2.5. So if you are connecting this to your textbook, those are chapter 2.5 in your textbook. The French and the Spanish, yeah. So one of the key concepts says compare and contrast French, Spanish, and English colonization. So that's kind of summarizing these up, and then English colonization will be the major rest of the packet. So a couple things I wanted to cover. We've covered most of Spanish, but French first. Things you need to know about the French. You need to know that they, and this is what I would underline, established to develop and export products. And then the major one that you need to circle, star, make sure you're related, is furs, especially the beaver. If you ever see a question about beavers on the AP exam, 90% of the time it will be in regards to the French. So what happens is this is what really makes the French different from the English and the Spanish colonizers. They had a great relationship with the Native Americans. In fact, it was actually a really successful trading partnership with the natives. So if this same exact situation with the beavers were to be Spaniards or English, they would come and say, give me your pelts or you're going to die. You're going to be enslaved, whatever it could be. The French do this differently. The French are going to say, if you trade with me, I will give you money and guns if you give me beavers. They create a trading network. And the Native Americans love this. They become extremely wealthy off of this trade system. So the natives are actually going to over capture beavers to the point that they almost go completely extinct in the world because of this trade. But it really works out successfully for the French because they get their beaver pelts for the women in Europe. Women loved beaver pelts as hats and as jackets because they were waterproof and they were very thin. And so it allowed them to be able to wear a light waterproof coat. And the natives loved it because they got money, wealth, and guns. Well, the other thing, too, is that this wasn't just confined to Quebec and Montreal. Instead, they're also going to explore the Mississippi River. Now, at this time, this whole area is owned by Spain, right? It's not called Louisiana just yet, but it's a Spanish colony. Spain feels like there's really no use in having this river and all these territories. They're going to sell it to France, which will eventually be sold to us in the Louisiana Purchase. But how we know this as well is if you've ever been to New Orleans, you know about the French Quarter, right? There's a reason it's called that. It's because it was controlled by France up until the 1800s. Now, in terms of negativity with the Native Americans, they did enslave Africans. So while they were really good friends with the Native Americans, African slavery was very common. There's a bunch of plantations right around New Orleans as well. If you want a great example, though, of how they did work well with the Native Americans, if you ever heard of the word rendezvous, right? You've heard of that, the big trading network where they would come together and trade with everybody. That's a French word. So that's how you know really the cooperation between the two. Now, Spanish colonization, again, you need to kind of know the similarities and differences between the two. So their major goal that you should be able to circle is the spread of the Catholic faith. While, yes, they wanted trade, mostly by force, but they're really going to spread Catholicism. Now, last year, the required SAQ was compare and contrast Spanish and English religion in the colonies. If you had put Catholic for Spanish, which most people forgot, they just put Christianity, you would have gotten the point on there. So make sure you relate the Spanish with Catholicism, and you should be just fine. Now, in terms of kind of unfortunate ways for some people, but ways that people began to explore, is we did have the start of urban legends about things that were going on at this time. For example, this guy right here, Ponce de Leon, was searching for the fountain of youth. Now, if you don't know the fountain of youth, in theory, you drink from the fountain, you get eternal life. He said that he had been drinking from this fountain for several hundred years, but he decided it was time to die. He goes back to Spain, tells them all of his exploring, and he dies. And this idea of the fountain of youth breeds from that. And because of this, people begin to massively search the world for this fountain of youth, for the way of eternity. Now, this guy right here, though, is a great example of why you don't want to go and search for these urban legends. He's going to take 500 men, begin in the Dominican Republic, and he is going to search all throughout here over the course of 9 years in an attempt to be able to find the fountain of youth. Well, unfortunately, by the time he gets to Texas, which is 3 years later, his people are all dead. In fact, he himself is dead. There's only 20 left. The reality is that this search for the fountain of youth wasn't successful. Hey, Alexia.
It wasn't? I thought we
Nobody's found the fountain of youth yet. I know. Even though the Pirates of the Caribbean movie says otherwise, we have not found the fountain of youth. But everybody ends up dying. They actually end up going and joining the native tribes because they themselves were dying. Because they could not find this supposed fountain of youth. Now, the most famous example, though, probably the one that still people continue to search for today, is what is known the 7 cities of Cibola, better known as the City of Gold, if you've ever seen that. So if you've seen El Dorado, it's all about the City of Gold, right? In theory, supposedly what happened is that this guy right here, he was searching all over for the City of Gold. He supposedly found it in Texas, which is interesting because every time you see a representation, it looks like the middle of the jungle. But he says he finds the City of Gold where every house, every building is covered in gold, as well as they said people were eating gold because they found it, it was just everywhere. It's kind of like, if you don't know, there's like a burger in New York you can buy for $1,000. It's made of gold. People start eating gold, supposedly. People are using it to create fences for their horses. And everyone begins to look for the City of Gold. Nobody has been able to find it. Supposedly it's in Texas if you want to go try to find it. Now, in terms of the impact the biggest impact is Catholicism. Now, if you look at California, you can see a ton of Spanish influences, in particular with Catholic churches. Now, a lot of Catholic churches spring up to be able to give this Catholicism, in California especially. And now these actually end up kind of going away. If you don't know, there's a big downgrade in Christianity in California and a big upgrade in several other religions, especially atheism has really sprung up. And so a lot of these are actually being converted into homes. And fun fact, Katy Perry got into this huge lawsuit for 6 years because she wanted to buy one of these. She finally won it after 6 years and $20 million later. She bought a mission home. So this is kind of like the impact of Spain on California. So now we're going to move on and we're going to talk about the really, really big one today, which is English colonization. These are going to be the ones you're going to be asked the most about. Now we know with English colonization that we got a lady named Queen Elizabeth, right? And she's going to start this. Yes? Yes, this is beginning chapter 3, excuse me. So this begins chapter 3 in your textbook. Thank you for reminding me. So Queen Elizabeth I is going to be really into this idea of exploration. We need to go and find what is going on in the world. Now, unfortunately, though, her wanting to explore creates one of the biggest mysteries in American history. And I'm going to share that with you. One that has never been solved. Maybe you can be the person when you go to college and solve the greatest mystery in American history. So let's kind of talk about what happens. Now, Queen Elizabeth I is going to hire this guy who looks like a lizard. Okay? And he's going to hire Sir Walter Raleigh to go and explore the Americas. However, Sir Walter Raleigh is way too famous to go and explore, and he's a little bit older. So he is going to hire this guy, John White, to go and explore the Americas. Now, John White is going to get together and find about 100 men and 50 women to go over into the Americas and discover it and found it for England. So this is his goal. He gets all these people together, plus a ship with about 8 months of supplies, because they thought, once I get over there, I don't need supplies. I'm going to be able to grow all my own food and become rich and famous, right? So they're going to go over there and found the colony called Roanoke. Now, Roanoke becomes successful for an extremely short amount of time, about 3 months. And then all the food's gone. They don't have a way to farm because they're really bad at it. They don't have the best relationship with the native tribes. And so they decide that something needs to be done. Now, before anything happens, though, they are going to have what is known as the first American to be born. So what happens is John White is going to meet a nice lady, and they're going to have a baby. Her name is Virginia Dare. Virginia Dare is going to become considered what's known as the first American, and especially the first Christian in America is what they say, the first baptism in America. And John White now has a kid, and he says, I can't let my kid die. I can't let these people die. I have to help them. So he takes 10 sailors, gets on one of his boats, and he's going to sail back to England to go and get supplies. He leaves his family, his new daughter behind, and he goes back to England. He stocks up a nice big ship. The day before he goes to leave to come back to America, Spain declares war on England. If you don't know, back then... Huh?
Who did they declare war against who?
Spain declares war against England.
Oh, England. Thank you.
Yeah. And so if you don't know, by the way, when they declared war back then, they would take all the ships and use them in the war. So John White loses his ship.
Why did Spain declare war on England?
Why doesn't Spain declare war on England? I mean, if you look at their history...
Was that the 7 Years' War?
No, this one was earlier than that. So really what happens here is that Spain and England almost every 10 years declare a war against each other. A lot of it was power. They wanted to show each other which one was the better person and which one was more powerful than the other. So they're constantly fighting in naval wars all the time, really up until 1900. I mean, they hated each other. Why in this case? I don't know. If I remember correctly, it had something to do with some ship from Spain was going along and an English pirate supposedly took their ship but then released it and didn't take any money. And so Spain went and declared war against England, and it went on for 2.5 years. It happens all the time. With Spain and England, you just kind of assume it's because one of them wants more power than the other. They fight a lot. It's kind of like sibling rivalry. They're always fighting each other, helping the other one's better than the other. Happens a lot. So he loses his ship to this war. 2.5 years goes by. The war finally ends. John White restocks his ship. He comes back to find his family. He shows up on the shores, and everyone is gone. And we're not just talking like, oh, there's a couple people. Everything is gone, except for a couple little clues. You see, when John White arrives, what he's going to discover is that every house is gone. Every person is gone. There's a fence there that's in pristine condition, but everything else has just magically disappeared. And this becomes known as the Legend of Roanoke. Now, all this information that we have, by the way, is only in the diary of John White. He wrote 3 pages about what he saw when he came back to Roanoke. That's the only evidence that we have that Roanoke exists, other than we do know that Queen Elizabeth sent him to discover the Americas or found the first colony. We don't know anything else other than what he writes. But I am going to tell you what he writes happened.
There were no bodies or anything?
Oh, we're going to get to that. It gets very exciting. So, let's talk about the clues that we have of what happened to Roanoke. So, here are our clues. Number 1, he told them if there was any trouble at all to carve a T into trees or fence posts in order to tell him that there was trouble. There were no T's. So, in theory, there's no trouble. Okay, that's a little strange. Then, Roanoke was completely ransacked, and John White had taken all of his wealth, dug a 10-foot hole into the ground, buried his chest with all of his wealth in it. Nobody else knew it existed, but when he arrived, his chest had been dug up, all the money was taken out of it, and the chest was still lying there when he got there. So, kind of another weird thing. We knew that there were 2 groups, kind of like 2 different parts of the neighborhood in Roanoke. Both of them are gone. They only found a single skeleton, which was buried in a traditional 6-foot grave. There were no damage to the skeleton. There was no blunt force trauma. There was no signs of broken bones. So it appears that this person died of natural causes. No other skeletons were found in the area, though. We know that the weeds were there, so they were gone an extremely long time. Most people who have analyzed his diary say that they probably were gone within 1 month of him leaving the first time. So they've been gone a really, really long time. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The word Croatoan had been carved onto a fence, and the word crow was on a tree. So in theory, this word Croatoan would have to do with something. Now, Croatoans were a nearby tribe. They had had some bad blood, but nothing to the point of killing each other. So that's a little strange. And then he had left a giant boat in case they needed to escape. The boat was completely gone. Every house was gone with no wood left. There were also no ash or anything like that from burning, but all the fences were in perfect condition. Yeah, getting kind of weird, right? Now, what could have possibly happened? There's a lot of speculation around that. I mean, all of these are examples of what people said. Maybe pirates came along, there was a giant hurricane that killed everyone. Probably the most famous is that they think either the Croatoans attacked and killed everyone, or the people couldn't survive on their own, so they went and joined the Croatoan tribe. But nobody really knows what happened. All they know is the Croatoans magically disappeared, and Roanoke was now gone. Now, in terms of more recent developments, back in the 1950s, these stones came out. This guy said, I have discovered the solution to the lost city of Roanoke. So what he said is that these were written by Virginia Dare. That's why they're known as the Dare Stones. So remember, that's the first American, right? The first Christianized American. Well, what happens is that he's going to say she wrote this in the Croatoan language, which we know this was the Croatoan language. She wrote this saying that they ran out of food. They went and joined the Croatoan tribe. The mystery has been completely solved. These stair stones get sold for today's equivalent of $60 million to a museum, and all of Roanoke has been saved, right? Well, here's the thing. This guy who sold it disappears. As soon as he sells it, nobody with that name is ever found again. Well, then they figure out that what he had done is he had taken this rock, carved into it, took oil and slathered it, put it into a fire to give it like an old patina look, took it out and sold them as if they were real, even though they were completely fake. They've now analyzed it with like modern day technology. They said that on the day that he sold it, this had probably been scratched in maybe only 6 days earlier than when it was actually sold. Yeah, imagine if you were that museum that bought that for $60 million, right? In terms of Dare Stones today, by the way, about 6 months ago, I got a message from a student that said, you're not going to believe this, they found the real Dare Stones. The other ones were fake, but they found the real ones. Turns out another guy went on eBay and was selling these for about $25,000, that he had gotten the real Dare Stones. Just to point it out, the picture that was on his eBay was this picture right here from Google Images. right?
Nice.
Yeah, and there were people bidding on this. So if you see dare stones, please don't go off and buy them. Okay, they're not real. But
What if they are?
I know, but what if they are? Maybe, who knows? But if you want, this is when it gets really, really cool and how students like you can make a difference. You see, this is where we get a real development in the case. So if you don't know, about 5 years ago, a bunch of people in France decided to take the Mona Lisa. They did an MRI and an X-ray of the Mona Lisa, found out that there were actually 40 different paintings underneath the painting that you can all see. It said things like the original painting has a smile, the original painting was more male than female, all this different stuff. Well, these guys at Stanford said, wow, it's cool to MRI things. We should MRI old maps, because you never know what you could find. So Stanford found this old map. This is in the Chesapeake Bay in North Carolina. And they are going to MRI this map, just for fun. It's like the 20th map that they did. Except they found something. You see, right here, you can see a little weird outline. It had never been noticed before. What had happened was, when they MRI'd it, they found this. So what you could see is underneath this weird patch that somebody for some reason had patched up this area, there was this weird like square thing right here. And when they x-rayed it even further, they discovered this little dot underneath that had been covered up. Now this, back then, was the sign for a fort. And there was no record that they've ever found of a fort being located in this area. So they now think that they have found the lost city of Roanoke. So what they've done is Stanford bought the land. They have then sent about 200 students over there for a 15-year project where they're excavating this whole area. They've already found skeletons. They've found pottery. They found coins, and they think that they may have actually found the lost city of Roanoke.
So it's not really the greatest American mystery ever?
We don't know. I mean, who knows? We could find out that all of these were, who knows? This could be the city of gold, and we finally found it. We have no idea. They're doing the same thing. Stanford's also doing that with the location of the Salem witch trials. Yeah.
Which pottery?
All they've said right now is it's pottery. They're not releasing a lot of info for a couple reasons. Number one, if they go out and say we found Roanoke, think of all the people who are going to go and flock to that place. You have people that are going to possibly go and dig up stuff themselves. People who are going to possibly go destroy it, because that's apparently what people do. Every time, it's just like when they find a new dinosaur. They don't release that they found a new dinosaur until like 5 years after they find it, because they don't want people going and ransacking the place. So they've just said they actually haven't even given a specific spot that they've been looking at. All they've said is they have found things and that they're going to release the findings in 10 years. That's all we know. So we don't know for 10 years. Who knows?
Unless you go to Stanford.
Unless you go to Stanford and you join this project. That'd be cool. Then you can go email me all the secret details. Or you can tell me it wasn't even Roanoke, and I'll just pretend I didn't hear that and keep teaching about the lost city of Roanoke. Because maybe. In terms of pop culture, by the way, if you're a big Supernatural fan, Supernatural did an entire episode called The Croatoans. It was all about this. So there's a bunch of episodes that you can find on TV about this topic. Yeah.
Have we used DNA evidence to examine the Croatoan tribe and see if we can find evidence that John said this?
Yeah. So that's... Hey, listen real quick. That was a really good question that you might want to know about. So that's a great question. The problem is there are no Croatoans that exist, as far as we know. The Croatoan tribe ended up going underground into a cave system. And then, there was a nearby cave that they went in and they lived in because of the hurricanes that kept coming through. And then all we know from that point, which is about 1590-ish to 1600, all we know then is they went, and it's called mingling with other tribes. That's how it's described in the manifests and diaries. So we know that they mixed with somebody, we just don't know who. So we don't have any pure blood.
Are there skeletons in that cave that we can use?
As far as I'm aware, I know that they have found skeletons, but they don't have guarantee that it's the Croatoans.
Right.
It's a giant mystery. That's the problem with studying history 500 years ago. Just trying to figure out what happened. But anyway, so a great big mystery about Roanoke. So in terms of what's going to happen next, right? We have to come up with a successful colonization. So now they are going to go and they're going to actually try really hard to colonize. not just do Roanoke. They're going to be more prepared. And they are going to go over and do the English settlement. So this right here, you need to star this. This is going to be the causation or the reasons why England is going to come over. So find any minerals or wealth. What minerals are they going to find? Or what do they want to find? Gold, especially. Silver, they don't necessarily know. They think silver is in South America. They don't discover silver until like 1650-ish. Okay, find a shortcut to China. They're going to try for that all the way up until they discover the Continental Divide, which is in like 1804. So they're going to still try to find a route to China. And then gain as much knowledge and food from the Indians. They truly believed that when they landed, all the natives would want to help them and would go and give them food and shelter and things like that. They didn't know that the natives would just not give them to them. Because the natives were really kind of saying, hey, maybe we don't want you here, so we're going to keep those secrets to ourselves. And it ends up, we'll talk about what happens to Jamestown because of that. So, the next one. I have a bunch of stuff in my hands. Okay, joint stock company. If you will do an arrow between joint stock company and then down at Maryland, the first bullet says proprietary colony. These are the two types of ways people could gain colonies in the Americas. So the first one is the joint stock company, which is the more famous one. This is where a group of investors sends explorers to create a colony. So the most famous of the ones, which I would highlight, is the one Virginia Company. The Virginia Company is going to probably be the most famous of them all because they're the most successful. Part of the reason why Virginia becomes so very rich. So in order to kind of learn and understand a little bit more about why these people would come over, we are going to watch a quick clip from the movie Pocahontas. You guys heard of that movie? Yeah. Now, Pocahontas, while the actual content is very historically inaccurate, Alan Menken, who is the songwriter for this movie, he actually snuck in a bunch of really good historical references into his songs that I like to use in class. We'll actually use another one later on. So what we're going to do is we're going to watch the opening scene from the movie Pocahontas, and we're going to watch some lyrics that are going to come up. And all the lyrics are on the board, by the way, so you can be able to read the captions if you need to. But what I want you to do is somewhere where you have space on your paper, I want you to create a little box or a little rectangle, or maybe on the back if you don't have any space. You just need enough for like 6 words. So create a little box or something. Or if you have 0 space, there's a bunch of space on the back. So here's what you're going to do. When you're watching this, you're going to identify one thing about American colonization that you can get from this. Whether it be why did they come, what did they expect, what were the attitudes of the people as they came, something along those lines. Make sense? You're just writing one thing about American colonization from this clip. Sound good? Okay. So let me go turn off the lights. And I have to go turn stuff on. So again, one thing about colonization.
Stories about him.
Are you coming on this voyage too?
Of course he is, you halfwit. You can't fight Indians without John Smith.
That's right. I'm not about to let you boys have all the fun.
there's a ton in there that you could put down. But one thing about English colonization in the Americas that you saw from those lyrics. There's a ton of stuff that you could put down. So think about, why did they come? What were they expecting? Maybe what did the Virginia Company say that they should be expecting? Just write down one thing. All right, so who can give me some examples of things that they were noticing in that clip? What things were they expecting, or whatever?
They wanted the 3 Gs.
Yeah, did you guys notice how they did the 3 Gs just in a different order? Right? They basically did exactly, God, glory, and gold. I don't know why I was missing that, right? Okay, what else?
Like it said in the song, like there's gonna be like diamonds just like sitting there and like gold hanging off of trees, so they expected to like have lots of easy
wealth, right? Yeah, imagine if you just walked into a city and there was gold hanging off the trees like apples, and then you had diamonds all over the ground, just like debris around. Yeah.
They trusted the Virginia Company a lot.
Yeah, did you notice how there was one lyric that they said, that's what at least the Virginia Company has been telling me, right? They trusted their company entirely. And then last one.
They expected a fight the Indians.
Yeah, did you notice how they said they were going to fight the Indians, right? And I didn't show it, I didn't keep going, but there's actually a section that comes next where they're on the ship and they talk all the time about how they're going to fight and kill the Indians. And that's what they keep saying over and over and over again, is we're going to fight them, and they're chopping off heads that look like Indians, but they're actually brooms, right? That's what people expected as they came along. So when they come along to America, they are going to go to a city called Jamestown. And Jamestown is going to be a starred term that you need to know as the first permanent English settlement. So when you see the word Jamestown, that's what you're going to be thinking. Now, Jamestown becomes, I wouldn't say it was successful, but they at least tried, But Jamestown is going to come over, and it's going to be named after King James I. And so with the impact of that, we'll talk about that in just a second, this Jamestown colony attempted to fix the problems of Roanoke. So if you look right here, in theory, this is where the Roanoke is expected to have been. Now, if you notice from the map that we saw earlier, the map actually places it right here if that map is accurate. Jamestown's going to be a little bit north in Virginia. Now, when they first colonized, they're going to come and meet with the natives, and they're going to say, we need some help, right? You need to be able to help us to be able to survive. That works for a good maybe 2 months. And then the natives are going to start to get a little bit frustrated. They're not getting really anything out of this partnership. And that's where the story of Pocahontas comes in. Now, if you've seen the movie, you know everything wrong, but that's okay. Disney didn't exactly put it out there correctly. Now, in the movie, they say about how they fell in love and things like that. That's not what happened. What happens instead is John Smith is captured by the Powhatans, which, by the way, on your notes, I would circle the word Powhatan on here. If you want to put underneath that, you could also put Pocahontas. That will help you remember the Powhatans. So with the Powhatans, they're going to capture John Smith and say that they're going to be executing him because of his crimes against the native tribe. Now, with this crime against the native tribe, they're going to say, we're going to kill John Smith, but if you agree to partner with us, then we won't kill him. And it really becomes a big partnership with the native tribe. What happens is Powhatan strikes an agreement with the colonists that are coming over into Jamestown, and they strike a deal. They decide that we're going to work together now. He is going to give his daughter to John Smith as a bride, which if you've ever heard of like Marie Antoinette or anybody else who as a woman gets sold off or moved, it's an arranged marriage. It's for political power. Powhatan did this for political power with the colonists, and it worked. He was able to get a really good trade partnership that lasted about 200 years because of this. Now, unfortunately, though, for the Jamestown residents, it's not all peachy and grand. In fact, what happens is that about 2 years into their colonization, they're going to go through what's known as the starving time. Now, what happens is they think a hurricane might have come through and changed. We'll come back to this. We'll finish this next class, okay? So, finish next class. Homework, don't forget to do your sermon homework. It is due next class period, okay? It's the John Winthrop sermon. You should have picked it up as you came in. Due next class. Sorry.